Ta-da. Hello, thank you very, very much, Lisa, for organising this. It's been so interesting, and it's quite hard coming in the afternoon because I feel like I'm just thinking about everyone else's talks and things I want to say and all of that, but I will try and keep it to what you asked me to do, which is talk about what I do, which it might be a bit boring for everyone, but I think it's probably important because it's quite practical work. And Charlotte, all your slides were so wonderful, and I've got one slide and it's quite neg. So I'm sorry to bring the mood down. I guess so. Arcadia Missa started as a project space and it's now a commercial gallery. And I started Arcadia Missa coming out of art school. Similarly to Charlotte, I kind of came out of art school looking for something more, I guess, and it might have been naivety and not knowing that there was already like quite a lot going on in London, but I just felt like there wasn't enough moments of being together, you know, and I think that feeling of being together is what drove me to set up a project space and is what drives all my relationships with the artists and is what guided us collaborating and Arcadia Missa working with Nnena, is that there was just really a deep level of trust built about how to just really be together and understand the artist's work. And it was a really brilliant experience for me and continues to be a brilliant experience for me in understanding an artist without being able to pick up the phone and chat and kind of the ways I've been used to working with the other artists on the roster. But at the core, the relationship is the same. It's about trust and it's about togetherness. And I think what also underpins Arcadia Missa's collaboration with ActionSpace is actually just really defining that, you know, it is an ecology and everyone does need to work together. And that everyone's labor is important, actually, you know, from curators, institutions, supported studios, artists, critics, not the bad ones, obviously. Yeah, it's really, because we had to define the relationship to make sure that Nnena is protected, we almost had to kind of define that there is an ecology existing to support artists. And I think that's what's actually important about the symposium today, Lisa, is it's trying to like really pull that apart and celebrate it, I guess. And that looking at labor is I guess what a lot of my work as a gallerist is. So it's not as, I'm not a dealer, right? It's not just about selling art. A lot of my work is actually advocating for the artists and having long exchanges, of which these are snippets, about why people's labor needs to be recognized properly. So as prompted by Lisa, a brief introduction to my wider professional practice is, what does a gallery do? It sells art, and I focus specifically on the primary market. The primary market is important to me because that's where artists get paid properly. And it's very important that whether we are working with an artist who, you know, is kind of at ease in the world and has all of the privilege in the world, let's say, or an artist that has the most needs in the world, that all artists are getting paid fairly and they're getting paid the same. And I think that's really, really important. And that's kind of where a commercial gallery can come in and advocate. And I think historically, I'm not an expert, but I think that the, you know, vulnerable artists are more, you know, at risk of exploitation. And that is the sad reality. And that's where I take my work very, very seriously. And we also manage the market. It's also very important that, you know, we're not a shop. It's not about getting everything out, not thinking about the future, not thinking about the legacy of the artist. It's about making sure the artwork goes to good homes, where people really understand they're custodians of the work and, you know, not there to make a quick buck. Gallery shows are also important. They're no way, they can't do what an institutional show can do, but we can very quickly put together an exhibition. We can take risks. You know, Charlotte, you've spoken a lot about risk. And when we did the first show with Nnena, we both really just wanted to go for it with sculptures. They are maybe as a medium in general, less commercial, but, you know, it felt important to take that risk and for people to see the sculptures. We obviously do fairs. That's about taking a massive financial risk. The fairs cost probably the same as the gallery rent in a year at times, depending on the fair. But it's really important to expand audiences in that commercial setting in different regions by doing fairs and by taking the artist's work to fairs. And then there's just kind of a lot of this like invisible labor of promoting, working with press, making sure the press contextualizes properly, which Charlotte spoke about as well. A lot of that happened around with Jessie. When Jessie was also doing the Turner Prize, there was a lot of having to correct press, promoting the artists to curators to institution, supporting production where needed, practice and career development, storage, packing and shipping things properly. I told you my talk was going to be boring, sorry. Framing, and then contract negotiations. And I thought that this was an area, which is why I've done this slide, that could be interesting, of like a more concrete example of where my role illustrates facilitation and advocacy. So for me, like the labor and recognizing the labor is so important, because it shouldn't be seen as a privilege for an artist to show work. It shouldn't, you know, on the one hand, we want togetherness, but we also need to understand that just because art is life and life is art, and it's this, you know, it can be such a kind of human expression, that doesn't mean that like that labor should be taken for granted or should be free. And I think that the artists that are structurally othered, you know, within a contemporary art world, I think that's where you may encounter the most kind of assumption about, you know, that they should be grateful for the platform almost, you know, and that's where there's the most conversations that I have with contracts about how, no, you can't get to merchandise something as well, or no, their identity shouldn't be at the forefront, and you shouldn't be getting a free performance and talk, etc., as part of it as well. And it feels like nitpicking, and I'm obviously like, part of my job is being the buffer and being, you know, the annoying person having these conversations. But what you find in most of these conversations is that there are a lot of like-minded people within this system that are all wanting to work towards that. And yeah, working together really does mean that a contract it's a draft, it's a negotiation, and that like the more that you kind of start to name labor and really break it down, the easier it is to kind of get to where we need to be. So all of that kind of, you know, archiving and I guess specifically in contracts where we're advocating for fees, especially like, you know, screening fees and things like that, the gallery doesn't take any cut from any other sources of income from the artists. The cut is always through sales, primary market sales. But all of this other work is what justifies galleries taking a cut, and it's why I kind of define myself as a gallery and not a dealer. So yeah, another thing in terms of protecting the market is to do with protecting the moral rights of the artists, and is to do with making sure that when we're selling art, and we are thinking also about future art history. And it's very important for the artworks to not only be well looked after and well placed, But it's very important for me that, you know, that future art history is protected, and also that their future career is protected. And that does come down to also stepping in around secondary market issues. And I think in the case of someone like Nnena, but also all the artists I work with, you know, being able to have negotiations isn't something that everyone wants to do, you know, and it is important that we as a gallery are willing to have those conversations, and willing to be there when shit hits the fan, essentially. So it's a responsibility I don't take lightly, and it's work that I do always with the future in mind, but making sure that the conditions in the present are as ethical as I expect them to be. Basically, that's, I guess, the privilege of running your own business, is your set of ethics is what guides you. And that's different to an institution where you have, you know, you're working within a set structure. At the gallery, we've created our structure, and that structure has come from a place of togetherness, and a project space. So, I mean, I think I'm kind of finished. I think that something that's separate to kind of what I do in terms of advocacy, and was a thought that I've spoken about with people, that people have said to me, and that I thought a lot about in the first half of the day, which was around contextualization and interpretation, was really that with Nnenna's work and the Turner Prize, what was really amazing was that, like, because meaning in a very expected or standard sense, you know, couldn't be pinpointed, it gives us, it's like a radical challenge to all of our roles. And actually what that does is really enhance our jobs. It challenges contextualization and representation. It demands that we experience the work on its own terms, which is extremely refreshing. And somebody said this earlier, they touched on this, that basically language isn't a one-to-one form of representation. Like, language is impoverished and limited. And I would also say that right now, more than ever, we kind of see it utilized for a lot of untruth, you know, and that it can be used to dismantle care, to dismantle love, to dismantle kindness, and to dismantle humanness. And that, like, losing this desperation within art to, like, hold on to what something means, or for it to only, like, have a value in existing if we can define its meaning, I think that that's actually really needed right now. And maybe it was always there, and maybe it was always needed, but I feel, for me, it feels like it's even more needed somehow. And yeah, like, art is beyond language, and that's kind of why it exists. Otherwise we would just talk all day in panels or write, you know. And so the fact that, like, we're finally celebrating with something like the Turner Prize, an art that like refuses to be defined in words, is like not just progressive, but it's also maybe getting back to, like, the very humanness and the starting point of, like, why it's important that we have art. I think I'll stop because that's a positive note to end on. But yeah, thank you very much for having me.